Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Depot Dive, where we're going to dive into three of the biggest Steelers-related topics of the week. I'm Ross McCorkle, your host, and above me here on the screen, my co-host, Joe Clark. Joe, how are you doing today? Not as exciting. Obviously, the Steelers dropped their first game. How's it going for you this week?
Yeah, it was a little tougher coming off the loss. Not as fun to, read about what happened in the game, but doing well. Looking forward to Sunday night. Always a big one when they play the Cowboys. Those games are always fun and different year, different personnel, but it should be another, similar type of game.
Yeah, as a sports writer, you start to kind of maybe get ahead of yourself sometimes, and you start to look at, okay, what does this mean if the Steelers go 4-0? It would have been just the second time since 1979 that they went 4-0. What are the playoff odds? And so you do all this kind of pre-work so that you have stuff ready to go if they hit that kind of milestone. And of course, they fell short. So a lot of that work out the window, but that is all right. There was still a lot of positives to take away from the game, along with several negatives that we will dive into here as well. I just want to plug at the bottom of the screen the phone number that you guys can call if you want to leave us a question. We answer that at the end of the show, one question every week, and so we would appreciate some questions from you guys. If you're just listening, that's 412-254-3145. Again, 412-254-3145. You can also text that number if you're a little shy and don't want your voice on the show, but we would appreciate those questions, and we'll get to that later. We're going to dive into our first topic, and that is, of course, wrapping up the Steelers and the Colts game that took place on Sunday afternoon. The Steelers got off to about as slow of a start as you could possibly imagine. The defense was only allowing, single-digit points per game all season long. And suddenly, the Colts score 17 points on their first three offensive drives. The Steelers dig themselves a hole early. The offense can't get things going. That's kind of what set the stage for how the rest of the game played out. The Steelers scratched and clawed their way back. They did have an opportunity to ultimately win. But when you spot the other team at 17-0 lead, a three-possession lead, you pretty much have to play perfect to secure victory, and they did not play perfect. Joe, what were some high-level kind of takeaways that you had from this game?
Yeah, I think that this game kind of got out of hand the way it did, and the reason why the Steelers lost was just too many mistakes. I mean, you had when they forced the fumble on Anthony Richardson, Patrick Queen. It looked a little on the TV tape. It looked like he had a better opportunity to fall on the ball. The all-22 it didn't look, as egregious as it did on the watching the game live. But that's still a ball Patrick Queen's got to fall on. That would have been a takeaway. It would have taken, eventual points off the board for the Colts. Then you talk about even the first play of the game and the play in the end zone, two balls where Joey Porter Jr. maybe could have had an interception, missed it by inches. That's not necessarily as much as a mistake as it is as a missed opportunity. And then you talk about the George Pickens fumble inside the 5-yard line that took points off the board for the Steelers. And then Justin Fields, the strip sack, the fumble. I mean, that's 6 points off the board from offensive mistakes. Who knows if Queen recovered that fumble, if Pittsburgh's offense could have gotten going. And it was a 3-point game. So there's issues right there. And then there's the other one too, when they got into field goal range with Spencer Anderson unsportsmanlike penalty after the whistle. That's 9 offensive points that you lose in a 3-point game. So that was really the biggest thing for me is that, yeah, it looked really ugly at the start of the game, but the Steelers weren't as out of it as it appeared. And then I think we saw in the second half, the offense really started to get going and they started to, build their way back and they came back a little bit. So that was obviously a positive. Justin Fields' second half performance after, the big loss and fumble on that sack was, really awesome to watch. Kind of him taking a step and really, I think, asserting himself into the starting role after, up to that point, it was like, oh, this is Chicago Justin Fields back. And then he completely flipped the switch and turned things around. So some good and some bad, but I don't think the Steelers were, as thoroughly dominated as it seemed like when we were watching the game live. And so I'm excited to see what they look like going forward and how they respond after getting punched in the mouth a little bit.
Yeah, to absorb that many errors, as you just went through many of them, and I feel like there were probably, at least a few more that we missed. But to absorb that many errors and only lose by 3 and have the ball back with, what was it, like 2 minutes and 20 seconds or somewhere thereabouts, and one timeout remaining, And the first two offensive plays of that series were very good plays, big, good gains. Justin Fields scrambled for a nice chunk, and then I think he completed one to Van Jefferson for another nice chunk. It really looked like, wow, okay, they're at least going to get into field goal range, maybe send this thing to overtime. Of course, then the botched snap and all of that happened and kind of set them off track. But to absorb all of that and still only lose by 3, especially after how the game started, there's some positives to take away from that. And I think one of the big things is just kind of what this all means for Justin Fields. I think he probably, he had some of his biggest mistakes of the season, but at the same time, he probably played his best half of the season. And really, it wasn't a whole half. It was pretty much the last 20 minutes of the game, starting with about a little over 5 minutes remaining in the third quarter. From that point on, he completed 10 of 17 for 172 yards and a touchdown. He also ran the ball 6 times for 41 yards and 2 touchdowns. Joe, I don't know if I can remember a time when the Steelers have scored 3 touchdowns on 3 straight drives in recent memory. Maybe there was an example or two, but it's definitely been a rare occurrence over the last handful of years. If you had to boil it down to one mistake out of all of those that we listed that really is kind of, haunting you or just maybe standing out a little bit above the rest, is there one? I know people kind of like to dismiss, like, oh, we don't want to talk about this. This isn't the only reason they lost. The players absolutely have to say that. We're the media, so we get to have a little fun with it. Joe, what's your big play there?
Yeah, I think the botch snap's kind of one answer, just because you had some, like you said, you had some momentum going ahead in that 2-minute drive, and that could have been, obviously you could have tied the game or won. But I'm going to go with the Pickens fumble inside the short red zone, just because that took basically with Chris Boswell, a guaranteed 3 points off the board. And it's just such an easy play to prevent. All he had to do was just get out of bounds or get down. He held the ball out weird. It just wasn't a play that a 30-year receiver should be making. And it killed, any semblance of hope the Steelers kind of had with that. Or it was a first half drive. And I know they got 3 at the end of the half, but you go in the half 17-10 or 17-6 is a lot better than 17-3. And then obviously, as we saw at the end of the game, those 3 points would have been huge. And that was just with how close they were to scoring there. That's the one that really stands out to me as the biggest mistake. And especially just because it was just so easily preventable. That's the one that keeps replaying in my head when I think about why the Steelers lost this game. The botch snap is bad, but the Steelers might not have been in that situation where they needed points on that drive had that Pickens fumble not occurred. So that's the one that I'm going back to as the biggest issue that I think happened for the Steelers and what ultimately might have ended up costing them the game.
Yeah, going back to that Pickens fumble, there's several plays throughout his career that he does that same thing where he, palms the ball, he reaches out for a couple of extra yards, and, it drives me a little bit crazy sometimes. Sometimes it's good, sometimes he's reaching for the first down marker or whatever it might be, and all of that. And so, you take the good with the bad, I guess, but there was a play earlier in that same Colts game where he had the fumble where he was palming the football for a couple of extra yards, and he was already well beyond the first down marker. So really, what is he doing there? He needs to be less careless with the football. I think it was Chris Long who was saying that's becoming kind of a George Pickens-like play. And so, you don't want that label as a wide receiver. Ball security is number one for any skill position offensive player. And so, yeah, I agree. That was definitely one of the biggest ones of the game. I kind of think that Joey Porter Jr., I don't blame him for missing the first interception, but the second interception I do think he should have had. And that would have been obviously a big turnaround for the Steelers, getting some momentum early in the game, because I really do think a lot of what played out, at least from the first quarter until 5 minutes remaining in the third quarter, was because the Colts had this 17-0 lead. And so if they could have made it a little bit more manageable, it could have opened up the playbook a little bit, earlier in the game, kept things more competitive early, and it would have silenced the crowd a little bit. I think multiple coaches talked about how, when you're in a hostile environment and you let them get all amped up, with the 17-0 lead, that's really tough to come back from. And so that's kind of the one I would point to, but I agree that Pickens one was killer. Najee Harris, let's talk about him a little bit. I know he obviously had probably one of the worst games of his career in terms of his per touch average, and he had that one really nice reception. I think it was 35 yards or something in that neighborhood. But other than that, 13 carries for 19 yards, I think. Was that the stat line?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you're talking about, you know, barely able to clear the you're not even clearing 1.5 yards per carry there. And that's about as atrocious as it gets. And so some of the stuff he said after the game, Joe, you want to walk us through that? And then also, I think he responded today to what Zaire Franklin said.
Yeah, after the game, I mean, Harris, after losses, has never been, Mr. Friendly with the media. And after the game, he took offense to a question about, Justin Fields in the second half. And he basically said, and I mean, it kind of goes for the both the good and the bad. He's like, it's not all Justin. The team deserves credit. It's a team effort. But he's very, unhappy about that after the game. Colts linebacker Zaire Franklin called him soft. And then later in the week, he went on a podcast and said that he was upset that Harris flipped off the double birds to the crowd. They had there must have been a video board before the Steelers ran out, and Najee was giving him the double finger. Harris about that, he said he blacked out, didn't remember doing that, and basically just said, "Hey, he's like the Colts won. He's allowed to talk as much as he wants." Which honestly, that's the best response he could give. Like, let it roll off your back, move on next week. And they lost, but um, as for Harris's performance itself, I mean, it was tough. The Colts were sending run blitzes. They had stacked boxes. Pittsburgh's offensive line wasn't, anything special. They weren't really giving him a ton of help. I mean, and everybody points to when Cordero Patterson came in, but Cordero Patterson came in. If you watch, the boxes were a lot lighter. Colts weren't sending, as many guys up in blitzing when Harris wasn't in the game. So it gave Patterson some room to run. And Patterson did run well, and he did run better than Harris, obviously. But obviously some mitigating factors there that hurt Harris a lot more, and it'll be interesting to see what happens. I'm really we'll get to the Cowboys a little bit later, but I'm really curious to see how he kind of responds. The Cowboys' run defense has been a disaster this season, so if I think Najee really needs to respond to the big game, kind of quiet some of the critics. But yeah, definitely not one to remember for him, and definitely not fun to get chirped as hard as he did post game. But he responded well, which with the way he was handling the media after the game, wasn't sure to be as friendly, but it was a good job by Najee, and maybe got some media training ahead of that, but he handled that one really well.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was about as good of a response as you could have. Just what are you gonna say? He had a bad performance, and there's really nothing he has no ground to stand on there. So props to him for that. But yeah, I mean, he didn't have any real holes to. There's been a lot of flack for him on social media, and just kind of, you look at the box score. You're doing some box score scouting. It looks terrible, and yeah, it wasn't great. And could he have maybe eked out a few extra yards here and there? Sure, but were there were there holes to run through? Not really at all. I mean, if you look through play by play of his 13 rushes, it's pretty rough. And, I think a big reason for that is we're going to talk about James Daniels' injury here, which is a big bummer. He suffered a torn Achilles, and then, you're supposed to have this rotation at left guard with Mason McCormick and Spencer Anderson. Next thing you know, both of them are, playing the entire rest of the game pretty much. You're having guys like Ryan McCollum come in as a tackle eligible because, they probably had this tackle eligible package planned for McCormick like they did last week, when Anderson's maybe in at guard in that rotation. And so you're having to put McCollum in there. I mean, it's just a disaster. I think he only lasted one snap, and it was a very, very ugly snap at that. I think it was on the 4th and 1 Justin Fields run. And so I think there was kind of a ripple effect to, some of the injuries that occurred, both to Patterson and to Daniels, and you have all these young guys on the offensive line. And so that's pretty tough to absorb. Thankfully, Isaac Seumalo appears to be coming back. We'll talk about we'll just move this in and segue right into the injury reports here, actually. It seems like a good chance to do that. Joe, if you want to take it away on the injury reports.
Yeah. So the Steelers today, Larry Ogunjobi, this is the big news, is Larry Ogunjobi left practice early with a groin injury. Ogunjobi's been really good, been a key piece of the defensive line. Having him leave practice early, we'll see what happens with his status tomorrow. Hopefully he's all good and can play on Sunday, but he would be a big loss in the middle for Steelers defense. That is not going to have Alex Highsmith. Mike Tomlin said he's going to miss another game with his groin injury. And I think Mark Cabali reported this morning that The team's targeting a week 7 return, which would knock him out also for next week against the Raiders. So, obviously big shoes again to fill for Nick Herbig, who's also dealing with an injury. Didn't practice yesterday with an ankle injury that he suffered in week 4. Today he returned to a limited capacity. Mike Tomlin said he should be able to play Sunday, so no issues there. Jalen Warren has a knee injury, did not practice. Would be surprised if he played again, given his lack of practice. Cordell Patterson missed with an ankle, and the Steelers signed Aaron Shamklin off the practice squad to the active roster, which might be a sign that one or both of Warren and Patterson are going to be out. And Patterson, according to Ray Fittipaldo, had a walking boot in his ankle on Tuesday. Cameron Hayward, rest day, he's all good. Michael Pruitt did not practice the knee. He's been out the last 2 games. Mike Tomlin left the door open for him on Sunday, but not practicing again today. Doesn't seem like he's going to be ready to go. Russell Wilson, limited with a calf. I know Fittipaldo said that there's a feeling that he might be the backup quarterback on Sunday. I don't know if Mike Tomlin would make that move, but he did say that Wilson is going to get more work in than he has, up to this point. That this week is closest he's been to full health. Wilson said he feels like he's close, but he did say he hasn't been fully 100% medically cleared. And given that, I think it's tough to kind of put him as the backup and not the emergency third. And I think there would be, we'd get a little bit more out of Tomlin if he was considering making that decision. But if Wilson goes full tomorrow, then I guess that could certainly be a possibility. And then Isaac Seumalo went full. So obviously a huge sign. He's likely to return this week, and the Steelers need it with their injuries on the offensive line. Jeremiah Moon, his practice window was activated yesterday. He hasn't been activated off IR yet, but they opened up his practice window, so he's got 21 days until he's activated, retroactive to October 2nd. He was a full go for the second day in a row with an ankle injury, and Keanu Benton was a full go also with an ankle injury. That's the theme of the week, 4 ankle injuries for the Steelers. So, obviously not great news with Ogunjobi there, but all things considered, it's kind of what we expected. Daniel's not on the injury report because he's on IR. So the offensive line injuries are not fun. They're problematic, especially for an offensive line that just had so much health, these last few years. And now, the injury bug has bit them. I think they ended the game Sunday down 5 of what would have been their top 10 offensive linemen heading into training camp. So that's a pretty crazy thing if you think about it. But the onus is now going to be on Mason McCormick to step up on right guard if they still rotate with Spencer Anderson. So it's going to be, guys aren't going to be able to replace James Daniels, but give it the best try they can.
Yeah, the offensive line reshuffling, they were already expected to need time to gel as a young unit with a lot of, first, second year players, guys with not that many starts. And so, they have yet to start the same starting 5 in back-to-back weeks this season, and that will continue in week 5 no matter what, with James Daniels exiting the lineup. So, you hope week 6 can maybe be the first time that they start that same group, but it's kind of been a week-to-week thing at this point, so I'm not going to hold my breath. And Mason McCormick's going to be in there at right guard. I think he pretty much confirmed yesterday. So Isaac Seumalo coming back to the left. There was some intrigue there just because Seumalo started the entire 2022 season for the Eagles at right guard, and McCormick was pretty much exclusively a left guard all throughout college. Way more snaps at left. But he said, he feels pretty comfortable. It's a lot of the same stuff, and he's been repping right guard and left guard for, most of his life. So maybe he doesn't have the experience in games, but he's practiced there and he's comfortable. And I guess we'll just have to wait and see if that is the case and whether or not Spencer Anderson rotates in. Anderson, meanwhile, has not really played right guard at all in the NFL, but he did in college, and he said he feels more comfortable on the right side. So that could be something interesting to watch if indeed they do end up doing a rotation there, which I kind of tend to think they might. And so I do think the Russell Wilson situation is kind of interesting. He told the media that he practiced in 11 on 11 today. He feels like he's right there. I think it's maybe a little convenient to probably keep him as the third, just so you can kind of delay some of the questions another week. Because once you bring him back into that lineup, it's a benching pretty much. If you're saying he's healthy, and Mike Tomlin did address this on Tuesday for the first time. he kind of changed his tune on the whole quarterback controversy. He had been pretty much hard deflecting every question about it up until this point, and he kind of opened the door, saying that there is the potential for Justin Fields to be the hot hand, kind of like a Mason Rudolph last year. They're not quite there yet, I forget the exact quote, not quite there yet, but, when asked what he would need to do to prove it, he said win. And so I think that week 5 against the Dallas Cowboys, one of the biggest stages in football, just because of who the Dallas Cowboys are, and it's Sunday Night Football, pretty much is shaping up to be a Justin Fields audition, a final audition for this starting job. I at least that's how I lean. Joe, do you think there is a world in which Fields struggles, makes it 2 straight losses for the Steelers, and they do go back to Wilson?
I think at this point, Fields would really have to struggle because even in the loss against the Colts, I mean, yeah, the fumble was a bad play, but in no world can you really say Fields struggled. Really brought them back in that game. I think he's kind of worked to the point. I mean, a lot of analysts have said this. He's worked to the point where he's allowed to have a bad game now. So, I mean, I guess if Mike Tomlin really, really loves Russell Wilson, if that's really his guy, then yeah, I mean, they could pull him and put Russ in, but I just have a really hard time seeing it given the way Fields has played up to this point. I mean, he's eliminated a lot of the mistakes that he was prone to making, and he just played, pretty sound football. He's a dual threat. He's ran the ball well. He just adds an element to the offense that it's going to be hard to replicate. Now, Wilson probably has a better, more accurate. That could be an element of the offense that, Steelers unlock a little bit more, but I think Fields has looked really, really good throwing the ball deep this year. Him and Pickens have had some nice connections that have been wiped off the board. I think there's really not much that Wilson's giving you at this point, if anything, that Fields hasn't given you so far. So, and that's it's a real stinker, just awful performance. I just have a hard time seeing them turning away from Fields unless, he stacks bad games. And I don't think if he plays poorly on Sunday, it would be a stack because he threw for 300 yards and accumulated 3 touchdowns against the Colts. So, I think he deserves the chance to stick at least another 2 weeks as Pittsburgh starter.
Yeah, I feel like I agree for the most part. I just think, Russell Wilson, I do think they want to see him, at least see what it would look like. Obviously Justin Fields is 25. The most ideal situation is for him to take control and be the quarterback of the future. But I do think there was excitement around a guy like Russell Wilson, but I think it was, who was it that pointed this out this week? I don't know, but it's Charlie Batch saying that, maybe the offensive line is a reason you wouldn't want to go to Russell Wilson. Going to be running for his life. He's not as mobile, not as able to escape. And Justin Fields' rushing performance has kind of been carrying the team's overall rushing totals throughout the last couple of weeks. And so, you would really like to, it'd be a shame to take that away. So I agree. I lean towards Fields, but I'm at least a little curious about what it would look like with Wilson, especially in the passing game. George Pickens is really the only receiver who's been involved at all, other than Calvin Austin III's big touchdown last week and a couple of other plays. It's the other receivers are averaging 3.5 catches, 40 yards, 35 yards, and a quarter of a touchdown per game between all of them combined. So
yeah, it's ugly.
Yeah, and so I wonder if Wilson would maybe improve that and balance out the passing attack a little more, which I think could have other benefits for the run game and et cetera, et cetera. But it might be one of those questions that we don't end up getting to see. And it's very, very possible at this point, especially given what Tomlin said on Tuesday. So, the Cowboys injury report. We won't go through it in its total here, but basically any Cowboy who you would recognize on defense is dealing with something right now. We're talking about Micah Parsons. Whether or not he will play, it seems very unlikely at this point. He suffered, I think, a high ankle, and for a defensive player that's as dynamic as him, even if he's playing, he's going to be very ineffective, and it seems like he's trending towards not playing. I don't know if he's officially been ruled out yet, but DeMarcus Lawrence, he's on IR now, so he's gone. That's probably, if you're taking Parsons out of the picture, Tank Lawrence is probably their other best defensive player. Deron Bland has been on IR. He was their big breakout defensive back last year. And then Trevon Diggs left practice today with an ankle. And he was kind of a breakout guy a couple of years ago in that secondary. And so you're talking about the front seven's banged up, the secondary's banged up. The Cowboys defense has already been bad. They aren't stopping the run really, especially, out on the edges. They aren't really able to contain the run. I think they had a pretty bad performance against Lamar Jackson and doing some of the quarterback designed run stuff. And so Fields can kind of feast there. It's really not looking great for the Cowboys in the injury column. And we'll just segue this right into our third topic, previewing week 5 against the Cowboys. Joe, what are you seeing here? Is there any way that you would attack this Cowboys defense, or what is one kind of matchup that you're looking forward to?
Yeah, so I think the biggest matchup of the game, and this was, I think CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott before the season, we ran through our predictions. I had that connection being the reason the Steelers would lose this game. So the one key matchup I'm really looking forward to watch is Joey Porter Jr. when he's lined up against CeeDee Lamb. I think Lamb's up there with Jamar Chase, probably is the best receiver that Porter will have to face. And when he went up against Chase, there was Jake Browning, a quarterback who, hey, Jake Browning did a great job filling in for Joe Burrow, but they don't have the same chemistry that a CeeDee Lamb and a Dak Prescott have. So that's a matchup where I think Porter's really going to be tested. But it's going to be tough to completely shut down Lamb, especially because he's going to get the lion's share of the targets. It's really him and Jake Ferguson. Jalen Tolbert will be the number 2. Brandon Cooks is out. So I really want to see how Porter can do against CeeDee Lamb. And I think that's going to be a big matchup for the Steelers to limit the Dallas offense, because really they don't have a ton there. The run game's been a disaster. But to flip it over for the Steelers, like you said, I want to see them run the ball. The Cowboys have allowed, I think, 583 rushing yards through the first 4 games. They've just been a disaster when it comes to stopping the run. The Ravens carved them up. The Giants, even last week, Devin Singletary, I think, had a decently solid game against them. It's just a team that has had issues all season defending the run, and it's caused their defense to really struggle. Alvin Kamara had 4 touchdowns against them in week 2. So you want Najee Harris to have a get-right game after really struggling against the Colts in week 4. I think this is the perfect opportunity for it. He's going to be a bell cow, especially. I'd probably anticipate both Warren and Patterson not playing. So you're looking at Najee Harris, Aaron Shanklin, and maybe an elevation of Jonathan Ward as your backfield. So Harris is going to be your guy, and I really want to see him. And obviously Fields on the design quarterback stuff. I want to see the two of them, really bust open this Cowboys defense. 150, 200 on the ground between the two of them, especially with the guys that the Cowboys are missing. Like, their run defense is bad with Micah Parsons and with DeMarcus Lawrence. Without those guys, it's probably going to go from bad to worse. So really want to see the Steelers take advantage on the ground in this one. And I think, my prediction has changed from the start of the season, given how the Cowboys have looked and the fact that they're banged up. And I think, the Steelers can really get their offense going on Sunday night.
Yeah, I have probably my best friend is a huge Cowboys fan, and he's just been down bad about this team and the prospects of beating the Steelers this week. But I will say the defense here, last week, the Colts were missing DeForest Buckner, they're missing Kwity Paye, they're missing all these guys in their defensive front, and they came out and just pretty much dominated in that fashion. And Mike Zimmer, he's a guy who has a trick or two up his sleeve. He's familiar with the Steelers and maybe some of the identity stuff that the Steelers like to do. Obviously, they didn't have Arthur Smith back then, but from his time with the Bengals and all that, he's been around the block. He's seen a lot of things. It's not a given that the Steelers break out with their rushing attack, especially, they could just pack the box and, say Fields beat us through the air. He did a little bit of that last week, but has he really truly taken a game over with his arm yet? I don't think entirely. So we could see more of that, and it could end up being a low-scoring game. But in terms of the Steelers' defense, I do think it's going to be an issue for the Cowboys. CeeDee Lamb being kind of the only source of offense that they have. Ezekiel Elliott has done next to nothing this year. Rico Dowdle has had an okay game or two, but it hasn't been anything special. I think Dalvin Cook was maybe practicing today, maybe not expected to play, but maybe could. I don't know what's going to happen there, but their rushing attack has been anemic. They can't run the ball. They lost. I think I talked about this on the preview before the season. They lost all these important offensive linemen: Tyler Biotish, Tyron Smith, and then they got some younger and kind of unproven players. I think Cooper Beebe has done a good job at center, and I think Tyler Guyton has flashed some things there at tackle. But Terrence Steele and the rest of the offensive line. I mean, Zach Martin's obviously great, but I think it's going to be a pretty tough day for the Cowboys, especially what Brandon Cooks is expected to miss. I believe he had some kind of infection from some procedure that happened after their last game, some minor procedure that I guess went poorly. So unfortunately, fortunately for the Steelers, it's pretty much just going to be CeeDee Lamb generating offense for them if everything goes according to plan. And, Joey Porter Jr. has shown the ability to take away these types of guys. So, yeah, that's going to be a big matchup like you highlighted. Let's give our score predictions, Joe. What you want to start?
I have 27-21 Steelers.
27-21 Steelers. I am going a little lower scoring. I'm thinking something like 24-14 Steelers. The Steelers have only won, They've only been in one game that was not a one-possession game. It was that Chargers game. They won by 10. I kind of see a similar thing playing out here. 10-point spread on that. I think the Steelers are favored 2.5 at home. I think they do clear that. We both have them clearing that. And so that is our predictions for the week. We do have a listener question here to wrap up the show. I'm going to go ahead and play that for us. This one is from, I believe his name is Ubby from New York.
Hey, Ross. Hey, Joe. This is Ubby from New York City, longtime Steelers fan, longtime Steelers Depot supporter. I'll keep it short and sweet. Are the Pittsburgh Steelers Super Bowl contenders? Thank you. Bye.
All right, short and sweet. We do appreciate that, Ubby, and I believe you're a first-time caller, so thank you for calling. We hope you call back. Joe, I'll let you start with this one. Are the Steelers Super Bowl contenders?
Yeah, I mean, this is a tough one just because you haven't seen any team's offense this year. I mean, in recent years, you've seen an offense, so there's no way the Steelers can hang with them. There isn't really a team like that this year, but, I mean, we haven't seen the Steelers kind of, there's been no thorough domination in any game so far. I mean, even against the Broncos, it was a 7-point win. I think we need to see the Steelers kind of, beat up on a team before, like this is what we're capable of doing before we can put them in the range of contenders. I mean, saw what the Ravens did to the previously undefeated Bills on Sunday Night Football last week. Like they beat down Buffalo pretty good. Until we see the Steelers do that to, any team, I think it's tough to say, yeah, they're Super Bowl contenders. I mean, we saw even the Lions Seahawks game. Like right now, could the Steelers beat either of those teams? Maybe Seattle. I don't know if they could beat Detroit. So you kind of look at these teams that are right now kind of really in the upper echelon, and I'm not confident putting the Steelers in that same category. Are they in the category of a team that could win a playoff game? Maybe two, yes, but to win the Super Bowl, it's tough for me to say that they're a real contender right now. I think we have to see a little bit more out of them before I'm confident going there.
Yeah, I look at the formula that is kind of necessary to win a Super Bowl, and the Steelers have the defense. Obviously, last week, is that a trend? Is that just a blip? I guess we'll see. But they do have a defense that looked previously capable of basically hanging with any team. That's going to keep you in a lot of games. You get into the playoffs and your defense just goes on a tear. You're going to be winning a couple of games, and you could. It's happened before, the 2000 Ravens and a couple of these other teams that, good defenses can do it. It was maybe a slightly different era back then, but, and then I think the adjusted net yards per passing attempt, typically you want to see your quarterback up in the, upper sixes to like 7 range is kind of good and what you would expect from a high functioning quarterback and offense. Justin Fields actually has climbed a little bit. A couple weeks ago, he was in the upper 5s, I believe, and now he is actually at 6.49. He's getting, fairly close to, I think he's 13th in the league right now. And so you have a quarterback who's able to run. He's proving that he can make these big passing plays. And you got a defense that can make things happen. I'm not going to call them a Super Bowl favorite or anything, but do I think that it is within the realm of possibility? maybe even more than I did prior to the start of the season. Yes, I do think that is possible. Maybe not probable if I'm given a percent chance, maybe like 15, like not even 15, like 10% at most chance of that happening. It's probably even generous there. But I do think it is possible just because of some of those things I laid out. Now, if they were to acquire a legitimate wide receiver too, like Davante Adams, which we didn't really talk about today, I don't know about you. I'm not ready to dive back into the wide receiver speculation. So we'll just let that thing play out a little bit more before we start discussing it. I'm sure it will for a couple more weeks. But yeah, if they bring in somebody like that, or if they, if Roman Wilson comes back and starts producing, which, before he got injured, I think he was the highest producing receiver in training camp. Now, this was before the pads came on. It was the first 4 practices. I think he had caught 7 of 7 for 97 yards and a touchdown, I believe, at training camp. That was the most on the team. So is he capable? I mean, I watched him dominate at the Senior Bowl, and there's players that, every year come out of college and do well in the NFL, so I'm not going to say that won't happen. I do want to see him on the field at some point soon. Hopefully that happens. I don't know when it will. But yeah, it's a long answer to say, yes, it is possible, Ubby, at least in my mind. Joe's maybe leaning a little bit more towards no, and that is probably the safer option there. Hope we answered your question to your liking. Let us know. Call back in and let us know how you think the Steelers are faring and whether you think that is a possibility. And anybody else who wants their question answered, 412-254-3145 at the bottom of the screen there. If you're listening on YouTube, like the show, subscribe to the channel, share it on Twitter or whatever that might be. We do appreciate it. We're still a pretty new show. I think, we're 26 or 7 or 8 episodes in now, something like that. And so we do appreciate all of you guys who are calling in and supporting the show as we look to grow it and just kind of chip away at this thing for, every week for hopefully a long time. So that is all for today's episode. I'm Ross, that's Joe, and we will catch you guys next time.